and a Jewish and Christian feast. The purification and rededication of the Jerusalem temple after the victory of the Israelites over when Cyrus came in, and then others, and restored, and then after also purified the temple. But then that temple, that second temple, did get destroyed in the year 70 after Christ was crucified, raised, and glorified, and then there was no temple after that ever again.
You've been listening to Worship in Spirit and Truth with Father Thomas Hopko. Father Tom is Dean Emeritus of St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio, on the web at ancientfaith.com.
Linking the ancient Christian faith with modern technology. You're listening to Internet-based Ancient Faith Radio.
It's time now for Stewardship Calling with your host, Bill Marianis. Bill is a stewardship evangelist whose Stewardship Calling ministry is focused on helping people, parishes, and Christian organizations discover and live their stewardship callings and embrace true stewardship and generosity so that they may have a good account before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. Here's Bill.
Christ is risen. Christos anesti. That's really great news. Don't miss it. But I've got some bad news for you. That's what the doctor told me at my last annual physical. Bad news? The two words you don't want to hear from your doctor when they're giving you test results. Sometimes you're so dumbfounded with that diagnosis that you ask something goofy like, well, doctor, how bad? I mean, as if there's gradations of bad health news like those infernal pain charts. You know the ones I'm talking about, the ones in every doctor's office and hospital with 10 faces from smiley to frowny where you're supposed to say how much pain you're in on a 10-point scale based on those stupid pictures. I mean, I want to throttle the person that came up with that imprecise scale. But a problem today is that in all of our news, it always seems to be dominated by bad health news. And the older you get, trust me, the more of it you hear. There's no one listening who doesn't have some health issue right this very moment. You know what you're facing. And moreover, there's no one listening who doesn't have someone they love who is dealing with a serious health issue. You know how much that is weighing on your heart and mind. Perhaps it's a sore limb or back pain or chronic arthritis. Maybe in your case it's cramps or a knee or a hip that lost its cushioning cartilage. But unfortunately, for many, the bad news is worse. Much, much worse. And then the doctor looks at you and says, I'm sending you to a specialist. That's never what you want to hear. You have to visit someone who knows how to poke and prod you more than Muhammad Ali, or who'll draw more blood than Dracula, or who'll take more pictures than a social media narcissist as they probe inside you and explore your internal organs. But you do it. And you go to that specialist so that you can find out the answer to that question you asked, how bad is it? The human organ we tend to talk about the most is our heart, whether we're referring to its endless love capabilities or the compassion it seems to engender. But at the same time, it's the very heart of our being, pun intended. It's the nuclear power plant that drives the blood you need through every one of your organs. You can lose a fingernail or even a finger and survive, but without your heart, your heartlessness makes you no longer a living human being. And yet, while your heart is without a doubt certainly one of the most critical organs you have, heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. In the U.S., someone has a heart attack every 40 seconds. Think about that. Just since I started talking, several people in the U.S. have had heart attacks. Another person just had one right now. I hope it's not you. Ever. But every year, almost 1 million people in the United States have heart attacks. And over 600,000 of them are a first heart attack. And shockingly and horribly, about 1 in 5 heart attacks are silent. The damage is done, but the person isn't even aware of it. My best friend Johnny died from a heart attack. The Lord took him before he or we even knew he was gone. I remember being in the emergency room with his lifeless body. The machine he was plugged into had nothing but zeros on it. His earthly scoreboard was cleared because there was nothing left in his heart to give. One person dies every 36 seconds in the United States from some form of cardiovascular disease, not just heart attacks. That's 1 in every 4 deaths for those of you that are keeping a gruesome score. And while the loss of life is the most tragic consequence, it's not without economic cost also. In 1 year, just from 2016 to 2017, heart disease cost the United States $363 billion, from the cost of healthcare to medicines to lost productivity due to death. But among the baddest of bad news, there's an even scarier one. The one word you never want to hear, a word whose linguistic origins you may not have even ever known about, but whose consequences are all too clear. Not surprisingly, the C word actually started with a Greek. Sometime in the early 400s BC, Greek physician Hippocrates, who's considered the father of medicine, used the terms karkinos and karkinoma to describe non-ulcer forming and ulcer forming tumors. In Greek, these words refer to a crab, most likely applied to the disease because the finger-like spreading projections from cancer called to mind the shape of a crab. But it was the Roman physician Celsus who, around 28 BC, later translated the Greek term into cancer, the Latin word for crab. And another Greek physician, Galen, in around 200 AD, used the word onkos, the Greek for swelling, to describe tumors. And although the crab analogy of Hippocrates and Celsus is used still to describe malignant tumors, Galen's term is now used as a part of the name for cancer specialists, oncologists. The American Cancer Society reports that human beings and other animals have had cancer throughout recorded history. So it's no surprise that from the dawn of history, people have written about cancer. Some of the earliest evidence of cancer is found among fossilized bone tumors, human remains in ancient Egypt, and the ancient manuscripts. Growths suggestive of bone cancer have even been found in some ancient mummies. In 2020 alone, an estimated 1.8 million new cases of cancer were diagnosed just in the United States. And over 600,000 people will die from that disease, making it the second leading cause of death. The cost of cancer care exceeds $174 billion annually in the U.S. and globally. By 2040, the number of new cancer cases per year is expected to rise to 29.5 million, and the number of cancer-related deaths to rise to over 16.5 million. For those of you keeping score, the top 12, if you will, bad news hit parade of most common cancers are breast, lung, prostate, colon, skin, bladder, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, kidney, leukemia, pancreatic, thyroid, and liver cancer. Now, prostate, lung, and colorectal cancers account for an estimated 43% of all cancers diagnosed in men in 2020. For women, the 3 most common cancers are breast, lung, and colorectal, and they will account for an estimated 50% of all new cancer diagnoses in women in 2020. Like many diseases, the cancer mortality rate is higher among men than women. So much for equality of the sexes, huh? However, fortunately, as of 2019, there were an estimated 17 million cancer survivors in the United States, including several of my guests tonight. And even more hopeful is that the number of cancer survivors is projected to increase to 22.2 million by the year 2030. But what should be a staggering wake-up call is that approximately 40% of men and women will be diagnosed with cancer at some point during their lifetimes. Let me say that again. Approximately 40% of men and women will be diagnosed with cancer at some point during their lifetimes. So when my doctor said that was my potential bad news, I wasn't surprised. Now, fortunately, at least for now, additional testing concluded that the first test was an aberration, but maybe the news wasn't so bad after all. Time will tell for all of us. But tonight, right before I went on the air, I posted a program promo on LinkedIn, and I saw a tragic response, a tragic post. It was from Maddie Russo, a student at St. Ambrose University. I do not know Ms. Russo, but I'm adding her to my prayers tonight And I ask you to do the same. Here's the post from Matty Russo, and I quote, "It is with heartbreak and shock that I share the news that my cancer has spread to my blood and is acute lymphoblastic leukemia on top of my original diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. Coughing up blood, continuous coughs, severe headaches, sleeping all day, excessive vomiting, and total yucky feeling aside from chemo told me that I needed to get a PET scan and bone marrow biopsy earlier than originally scheduled once at the end of May. Although that most certainly wasn't the news I wanted to hear on my birthday, I'm grateful for trusting my gut. God says my work is not done yet, and I must keep fighting as there is no other choice. Cancer, you still are not the boss. And no matter how you try and destroy my body, I will win. And I will show up every day to battle with you. That is what being a warrior is all about." End quote, end post. You go, girl. May the Lord provide healing, comfort, and peace to Ms. Matty Russo. As bad as cancer is, chronic diseases are even more ubiquitous in a normal condition of life. Chronic diseases are defined broadly as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention or limit activities of daily living or both. It's the big three chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes, that are the leading cause of death and disability in the United States. And they're also the leading drivers of the nation's $3.8 trillion in annual healthcare costs. As dramatic as the data is regarding heart disease and cancer, more than 34 million Americans have diabetes. And, get this, another 88 million adults in the United States have a condition called prediabetes. Then there's the irreversible progressive brain disease, Alzheimer's, that affects 6 million Americans, including 1 in 10 adults aged 65 and older. Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death among all adults and the 5th leading cause for those among 65 and older. But it's the next A bad news disease that is perhaps the most pervasive. Arthritis affects 59 million adults in the United States, which is about 1 in 4 adults. Well, aren't you glad you tune in tonight to listen to mind-numbing stats of how poorly we're taking care of the sacred vessel our Creator entrusted us? But here we are, in various forms of pain or illness that all follows those fateful words from our doctor, "I have some bad news for you." Well, not tonight, my brothers and sisters. Tonight, we don't focus on the illness, but instead we cast our vision on the spiritual antidote. We don't focus on the disease, but the cure. We don't focus on the bad news, but on the good news of life and living, a calling given uniquely to you by your Creator. Tonight, we talk with faithful Orthodox Christians who heard their doctor tell them, "I have some bad news," but instead chose to live the life to which they have been called, to live their stewardship calling, not only in the face of their difficult medical diagnosis, but actually in spite of it. Tonight, we bring hope and the light of the world to the darkness of disease. Tonight, we share with you some strategies and ideas of how you too can face the bad news you received or that a loved one received and stay focused on the light. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to Stewardship Calling in the first Wednesday series on Ancient Faith Radio. This is Bill Marianis from stewardshipcalling.com, coming to you from the shores of beautiful Lake Lanier in Gainesville, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. I have a simple premise that you have been called by your Creator to a personal calling, a reason to your life and a reason for your life, something you need to do with all of the gifts over which God has made you a steward. It's what I call your stewardship calling. And St. Paul makes it crystal clear that we all have a calling. In his letter to the Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1, he clearly states, quote, "I beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called," end quote. Until 2017, by day, I was blessed to be a partner in 2 great international law firms of over 1,100 lawyers each, where I served in management, including as managing partner of our Atlanta office and practice in the area of mergers and acquisitions and corporate law. But my personal calling is to be a stewardship calling evangelist. I'm here to help people and parishes discover and live their stewardship callings so that they may have a good account before the awesome judgment seat of Christ. As we follow Christ's great commandment to love one another, his great charge to serve one another, and his great commission to make disciples of all nations. Welcome to that journey. Now, this program and a lot of other helpful tools and information about effective churches and stewardship and church strategic planning and servant leadership and other topics can be found at my always free website, stewardshipcalling.com, and you can reach me at bill@stewardshipcalling.com. And to all our listeners tonight, we again want to invite you to join us by calling in and interacting with my special guest that I'll introduce shortly by calling 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. From the Holy Unction service that Orthodox Christians celebrated just a few weeks ago on Holy Wednesday, we prayed, and I quote, "Illness and distress have worn us out. Being compassionate, O Savior, wash away the pain and trauma and suffering in the river of your tender love, O Christ, and also through your priests as they anoint us with the Holy Unction. Through this cleansing, O Lord, may we gain our health," end quote. I mean, how powerful are those words when you hopefully recited them just a few weeks ago? Illness has worn us out. I mean, some days illness has flat worn me out. The day I received this blessed sacrament of Holy Unction was the very day after I'd had cataract surgery so that I could see more clearly. But tellingly, we refer to the Lord as the, quote, physician of our souls, end quote. Indeed, the seventh prayer of the Holy Unction service begins, quote, "O Master, Lord our God, physician of souls and bodies, it is you who soothes the chronic pains and heals every infirmity and malady of the people," end quote. So again, our faith teaches us to whom we should look for comfort and cure. Yes, we should trust the doctors the Lord has put in our path to help us. But in a piece that was entitled "Sin, Sickness, and Salvation," Father Chad Hatfield wrote, and I quote, "It is also recognized that often only sickness and suffering can wake us out of our empty isolation from God in pursuit of transient pleasures. Thus, in a widely used prayer for Orthodox Christians, there is a prayer in time of trouble, with the petition, 'Have mercy upon me and deliver me from this trouble that besets me, for which I know I am deservedly suffering. I acknowledge and believe, O Lord, that all trials of this life are given by thee for our chastisement when we drift away from thee and disobey thy commandments," end quote. In chapter 9 of an amazing book entitled Health and Medicine in the Eastern Orthodox Tradition, the late great theologian Father Stanley Heracus makes mention of the fact, and I quote, "Nearly all of the services of the church include some mention of healing. This focus on healing is central to an appreciation of the liturgical rites and pastoral practices of the books of needs. Yet Orthodox Christians recognize this connection between sin, suffering, and salvation, finding it expressed in the prayers of the Orthodox Christian Church. Sickness and suffering are understood to be avenues of salvation and a participation in the glory and joys of the resurrection of Christ and life in the kingdom of God. This is why the Orthodox Church teaches her faithful to accept suffering as something that has the potential of bringing them further along in the process of theosis," end quote. And Father Stanley Heracus also went on to write in a piece called The Orthodox Christian Tradition, Religious Belief and Healthcare Decisions. And he said that the Orthodox Church regards human life and well-being as gifts from God, which is the creator and sustainer of life, as well as the prime source of healing. The church perceives the healing of a physical illness by the medical professional as a God-given art, which serves God's purpose. It helps restore so that their spiritual and moral growth in community can continue. And he concludes by saying, "The Orthodox Christian views suffering as a consequence of our broken and sinful condition that comes to human beings in various ways. The Orthodox Christian Church teaches that preparing for death is primarily a spiritual responsibility," end quote. Indeed, in the Divine Liturgy, we actually pray that prayer from 2 Corinthians 5:10, that where we talk about the end of our lives be without pain, blameless and peaceful. So how do we do this hard work? How do we receive the diagnosis of bad health news and the consequence of medical treatments or testing and carry on? See, this is hard. We must know that God has uniquely called us to a purpose, something to do with our lives, and yet we've received another secular diagnosis of disease. So then what? How do we cope? How do we proceed? Well, as it turns out, the answer is actually easier to articulate than it is to practice. You see, as it turns out, it's as simple as the number 1. and as simple as the duration of one day. The concept of one day at a time, that's it. Just one day and only one day. And where does this wisdom come from? Well, let's start with the most important physician's desk reference. Not that huge book that's on medical doctors in their offices. I'm speaking of the physicians of our soul's desk reference that we should all use daily, the Holy Gospel. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verses 27 and 34, we read, quote, "And which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his lifespan? Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Think about it. And listen to these powerful phrases again. The day is its own trouble. In other words, don't worry about tomorrow. Instead, focus on today. That's enough trouble for one person. Or maybe just focus on the next few hours, or maybe even just the next few minutes. In the next thing you do, you can make a difference. You can bring about hope or joy or love. In the next few hours, you can temporarily block from your mind the pains and the diseases ravaging your body or the body of a loved one, and instead focus your heart and your mind and your soul on the critical work God has called you to do. In that moment, who is the person I can help? What are the problems I can solve? What is the specific work I can do? That wonderful gift of free will, which my glorious Creator gave me and you. These are all the questions you should ask yourselves. I heard a powerful message from Pastor Andy Stanley, who famously said, and I quote, "Believers didn't change the world, doers changed the world," end quote. Not that belief isn't important, but rather that belief alone is not enough for all of us to make a difference in the world. It must be followed by the actions our Lord and Savior taught over and over and over again. He was always preaching about doing something, actually talked about getting something done. Free will, that great gift from your Creator, gives you the choice to focus on your pain or your problems, or your disease or your illness, the things you cannot control, or instead to use that free will gift to focus on what you can do to make a difference in the kingdom, capital T, capital K. Free will. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts God has given each and every one of us, if only we could master it, one day at a time. And where else do we hear this clear solution? In perhaps the most successful program for one of our most pervasive chronic diseases. According to the 2019 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, 86% of people older than 18 have drunk alcohol at some time in their lifetime. Indeed, 26% of people 18 years of age and older have reported that they've engaged in binge drinking in the past month. And there are at least 15 million people struggling with alcoholism right here in the United States today. While one day at a time is perhaps one of the best-known sayings of Alcoholics Anonymous programs, it's also a major principle in mindfulness. Many people who are working towards sobriety or overcoming some other debilitating illness are triggered when they experience overwhelming negative emotions, such as worries over their future. But when you live one day at a time, you focus on your present goals. Stay focused on one day at a time allows you to live in the moment by remaining positive, even in challenging moments. Finding self-love and affirming why you are worthy of that love as a child of God, and embracing a mindfulness practice that you find meaningful, like prayer or meditation or being in nature. But there's another mantra that helps you make progress in the face of a bad news medical diagnosis, and that is, quote, "Nothing changes if nothing changes." Let me say that again. Nothing changes if nothing changes. So by staying focused on a short list of one-day goals that you can go to bed each night knowing you accomplished what you set out to do, soon it may feel easier to add to your daily goals and use prayer or mindfulness to acknowledge hard feelings without dwelling on them or letting them trigger you. Sometimes the concept of even living one day at a time is too hard. The pain or the illness or the concerns are just too great. In those cases, if you find living 24 hours unachievable, change your mantra to living 1 hour at a time, or maybe even living 5 minutes at a time. Tonight, we hear from amazing Orthodox Christians who've done just that. They received bad news, horrible news from doctors, and juxtaposed it against the good news they received from their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. They put one foot in front of the other and just kept on moving towards the fulfillment of the calling to which they had been called, as St. Paul repeatedly reminded the Ephesians and us. And it's time that we hear from them. So I'm going to take a short break right now, and when we return, I will introduce the first of my three special guests, Rip Kastaris, as we discuss living your stewardship calling after a diagnosis of serious illness. Please remember, we'd love to hear your questions, so feel free to call in at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Okay, let's take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Bill will be right back, but the lines are open if you want to ask a question or offer your thoughts. The number is 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
No end of books these days offer us techniques for self-improvement. But in the newest release from the Ancient Faith store, Gratitude in Life's Trenches, Robin Phillips takes a different tack. He shows us that God meets us where we are, in the pain and heartache of the present moment. Instead of looking for a way to escape from hardship, we can cultivate an attitude of gratitude, peace, and self-acceptance that will transform our experience of suffering. Drawing on his own experiences and his work as a consultant in the behavioral health industry, as well as stories of saints and sufferers, teachings of the fathers, and recent discoveries in neuroscience, Phillips shows us that the journey to personal well-being is one we can all travel, regardless of the hardships we may face. To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Stewardship Calling is back, and we are ready for your call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Bill Marianis.
Welcome back to Stewardship Calling and our first Wednesday program as we start to explore living your calling after a diagnosis of a serious illness. Rip Kastaris, a dear friend of mine, gained international recognition by creating artwork that combines historical tradition with a contemporary vision. He is the principal, he is the exclusive artist behind an epic mural entitled Kyklos, Circle of Glory, that's on permanent display inside the Athens Olympic Stadium in Athens, Greece. And he's done it for images on an interactive DVD for the rock star Sting. And he's also done it for rendering 15,000 square feet of iconography at St. Josaphat Ukrainian Cathedral in Parma, Ohio. In all of that, Rip expresses his timeless vision using a wide variety of media. Kastaris is a 4-time official Olympic artist and the first Greek American to be commissioned by the U.S. Olympic Committee to create original art representing American athletes. He's been featured on the PBS documentary, The Greek Americans, and national publications such as U.S. Art, the National Herald, and the Hellenic Journal, in addition to making appearances on Greek and European satellite stations such as ERT, Mega, Antenna Television. In 2003, Art Kastaris received the Artist of the Year Award from the Ilios Society in San Francisco and won the 2007 National Award of Excellence from the Associated Church Press. As the son of a Greek Orthodox priest born in Greece and returning there both creatively and spiritually, Rip Kastaris brings an authentic vision to Byzantine iconography. His icons range from small panels to murals filling the 5-dome structure at St. Josaphat Cathedral in Ohio. Based Ukrainian Catholic eparchy, completed this entire project in 2018, and perhaps this is where Kastaris will leave his greatest mark, for these images are surely going to remain long after his lifetime. He's rooted in the past, but his images tell a timeless story with meaning for today and continues the Byzantine art form in his personal, unique manner. And I have several of his more modern pieces hanging up on the walls of my house. Brother Rip, finally, I get a chance to welcome you and speak with you again here on Stewardship Calling on Ancient Faith Radio. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, Bill, and it's great to reconnect with you. And congratulations on all the great work you're doing.
Well, thank God. Thank God. Now, look, I just gave your bio, but there's always so much more to someone, particularly someone like you, than their official CV. So would you please share with the listeners a little bit more about your upbringing and your background?
I guess my story is one of a kid that came from Greece very young. My mother tells me that I took my first steps on the boat from Athens to New York. Seems like all the steps I've taken since then have been some way of connecting or bridging the gap between the world we came from and the more modern one that we entered when we got to New York Harbor in 1961.
How old were you when that happened?
So I took my first steps. So I was a year old when
1 year old.
1 year old when we came to the United States. My my dad took the invitation from Archbishop Iakovos to leave the old country and help Greek communities here, and we moved a number of times. But having a name like Euripides, the first day of class was a little tough.
Yes, for those of you that don't know, that's his first name. So even though I introduced him as Rip, his full name is Euripides. I can't imagine what that was like when you show up in school.
I mean, everybody turns around in class and says, "Who the heck is that?"
Yeah.
And you kind of long to have a name like Rick rather than Rip when you're that age. But as you get older, you keep running into your Greekness. Like you go to college and every subject that you study, they say, let's start at the beginning in ancient Greece. It's such an honor and so meaningful to be Greek and American because Greece has had such an influence on everything from when you go to Washington, D.C., you're looking at a resurrected Athens that's come across the water and reconstructed itself as part and parcel of what it means to be an American. So being from two places has always been my story, and being part of a Greek Orthodox community, as my dad was the leader of our church. We had no relatives here. I was born in Thessaloniki, and everybody's still back in Greece. But it's so when I would go back to Greece, I wasn't Greek either. I was on Medikanaki,
Right. Yeah.
But it's been a great adventure, and I've learned so much from being here and having the opportunities. I mean, my parents made every effort to come to the United States, not because my dad needed to be paid more or because he looked for adventure. He and my mom wanted their kids to get the greatest education that they could, and they said that we would be able to do it here. And so those values about, like, even though we run a restaurant, our kids are going to be graduates of the best universities, and they're going to be professionals, and they're going to do that. Nase Anoteros is like the call to be exceptional is in our DNA. And so, there's just so much to being Greek. And I've had a great experience because I've always been part of the content that gets shared amongst people in a community. I was always able to, and you hear about some things that aren't so exciting sometimes. Some people are better than others, but overall, as a kid growing up in a Greek Orthodox church, you hear the presidents of the EHEPA and of the Philoptochos and the visiting authors and the real doers and the shakers and the people that create things. You really get influenced by that. And your parents make you feel like your great-grandparents built the darn Parthenon,
Yeah. What are some of the places that you've lived? Where are some of the places that you have lived and been while you're here in the United States?
We first came to Ohio, and we're in a small town named Lorain, Ohio. I remember we left there when I was just about going to kindergarten, and the snowdrifts were taller than me there. And I joke about it because, my parents were from the very mild climate of Athens, Greece.
Right.
And I say, I heard a conversation where my dad was speaking to Archbishop Iakovos, and he said, we're very honored to be in the United States, but could you move us a little further south, Your Eminence? So from there, we went to St. Louis, where my dad had a parish here. It was just perfect for me because it went from I could see the arch being built from my kindergarten window in St. Louis.
Oh, wow.
It was completed in 1965 when I first started school. And then my dad got a new commission to go to New York, Queens, Jamaica, St. Demetrius Church in 1978 when I was graduating from high school. They left, and I stayed. I went to Washington University in St. Louis. I went to the art school here. It was a great art school and part of an awesome university. My parents then also had a church in Canton, Ohio, the home of the Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the Hall of Fame.
And wound up then the last two commissions that my dad had were in Florida. I said, Dad, you did such a good job for the Lord. He sent you to Disney World, I think. But he didn't have to shovel snow, and he was in Gainesville, where he loved being with the professors and the students that had come from Greece, and he was a special person. Everybody, when we wept over my dad at his funeral, I can't tell you how many people said, "See all those people over there? Your dad was really a better friend to me. He was really special to me," and everybody felt that way. And regardless of whatever else happened, he was a person who was never in doubt of what his mission was. We argued a lot about politics and ideas when I was a young artist, but in the last 2 years of his life, I was starting to do icons, and he became my historical consultant and my Orthodox, my Orthodox scholar that I could ask. And sometimes we both didn't know the answer to something, so we would go research and then talk again. And while I didn't see the work that I did doing the Pantocrator at a huge size in the last cathedral that we painted, he was always interested in and was very touched and was very glad to see that whatever art that I did had wound up being part of a church. He would say, "Would you please send me anything that you do?" And I remember a call I got. He said, "Rip, I like that you are doing the Orthodox iconography, but I want you to know you are very good. You're very good." So.
That's great. Well, it's always, that's got to be so special. I mean, both for him, because, he was delivering the Lord's message in a unique way that only a clergyman can do. And you found a way to deliver it using an entirely different art form, but in a way that is intentionally as expressive and as personal as anything else is. And that had to make him
and it's such a big part of our faith, the visual part of our faith. It's inextricable. You cannot have a Greek Orthodox church without our visual. It's so old that people didn't even read or write, most of them back then.
Right.
And the icon, while books, when they first came out, we didn't have a Bible in everybody's hands for 1,600 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people forget that. But the icons were a Bible made visible that everyone can share, regardless of what your economic stance is. And within those images and within those storytelling capable paintings, the entire story of salvation, of eternity. When you're in the Greek Orthodox Church, you're both in heaven and on earth at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Like, God is there. Christ is in the dome. He's just above where we can touch. But he's there. He's imminent. He is in everything there. And the whole language of the church, with the 4 evangelists on the pendentives that are on the pillars that support the ministry of Christ, and then the whole structure is so worked out in the Byzantine tradition. And I never thought I was going to be an iconographer. I remember telling my friends in art school, "Boy, I'm glad my parents moved to the United States, because if we were back in Greece, I'd probably be stuck doing churches,
Yeah, it's funny how things come around, doesn't it, right?
So I'm working in advertising, and then I get to the point where everything's just like half an inch deep. Bring in the beer, bring in the
Right.
girls, bring in the horses. Okay, it's over. Well, I mean, like at some point you say, I don't want to put free on anything else anymore. And I
Yeah.
went back to Greece, and the hair on the back of my neck would go up when I would go into these ancient churches where you'd only see part of an angel or only one eye looking back at you, or
Right.
know that something was there thousands of years ago, and that these broken icons were heroic survivors and wounded healers themselves. And I started doing some images that were really not iconography for churches, but they were just the emotions and the feelings that I got when I was in these ancient places. And I went to IV, and we went to Mistra, and I mean, there's just so much beauty almost in the decay of some of the things that you see.
Right.
And you say,
Right.
and the beauty of the tradition in Byzantine art is, even if you only get a fragment of it, you get the whole story because we follow that tradition. You know that sword is held by Michael. You know
Right.
that orb is held by Gabriel. And because our structure is one that has not varied, then it's easy for you to kind of like read between the lines and within the gaps. And you can say, well, if even the images of God and the eternal are turning to dust, maybe it's in the dust as well. And it just had a real profound effect on me. And I wound up not being able to stay in advertising anymore. I just had to do work that reflected the kind of feelings that I got when I went into monasteries that looked out over vistas that were just like amazing, and how there seemed to be things that repeated in our culture that just seemed to connect all the dots for me. And it's really been quite an adventure in always trying to take the courageous step and doing what I thought was right, as opposed to what might pay me more, or what might be a safer way to go. And I've had the opportunity with you to work on art that went into Olympic Stadium in Athens. I was able to do projects for all kinds of things that are kind of like once in a lifetime things, and
Yeah.
it's been quite a privilege and an honor, and the sense of doing art not for myself but for a community, to be kind of like the tuning fork for all people, is really a more ancient or classical way of doing art, that you do it for the tribe, as opposed to you're going to do some crazy thing, and the more different you are, the more you'll be respected. No, and in traditional art, everyone wants to make that image, but certain people are given that responsibility. And I felt like I'm part of a tradition that goes back to the apostles, to ancient Egypt. If you continue to do those same images in the same places, using the same colors for the same reason as an artist might have 1,500, 1,800 years ago, it's a pretty awesome feeling.
Well, listen, I like I said, I've seen your work now over decades. And one of my favorite pieces, it's what I call the Kastaris transition period. I mean, we're going to have names, like different artists have a different period, right? But it was when you were first started doing that, and you did those half angels, those half Gabriels, those half things. Right. And we had one of them on the stairs going upstairs in the house. And so every time I went upstairs, it was perfect because it was going up, right? So I see this image there and whatnot. But Rip, just to kind of put, the eloquence of your words are its own beautiful artwork and its own graphic visual imagery. And we're going to get into that in a second. But recently, and in fact, just not so long ago, you went through a incredibly serious health issue and health challenge. And I'd like for you to share whatever it is you're comfortable sharing with our listeners so that they understand what you have just survived.
I'd be happy to. As a thumbnail, I went to Chicago, where our family was going to come together for Christmas and a cocktail, and I wound up staying for 6 weeks because I had a coronary incident. and I had no idea that was going to happen. We actually picked a hotel where it would be 15 or 20 minutes from everything so that we could get exercise. We're getting older. You think that you're doing the right thing. I've always tried to watch what I eat, try to get exercise. You can't help but put on a few pounds over time. And you don't know that tomorrow could be your last day sometimes. And it almost felt that way. But after walking around the city for a while and saying, do you think, guys, that we could slow down so I could catch my breath a little bit? That night, it was 2 days after Christmas, I woke up an hour after I had gone to sleep. We had gone out to listen to some music, went to sleep about 1 o'clock in the morning. I just stood straight up in bed. I felt like I had like a 50-pound weight on my chest, and I had gotten a new Apple Watch for Christmas, and I looked down, said that my heart rate was 126 beats a minute. Said, 126? That's when you're running, not when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
I said, I want to go to the hospital right now. I don't care if I'm embarrassed. But I was so lucky, so blessed that we were only 2 blocks away from a world-class cardiac surgical hospital, Northwestern University, and the ambulance was there in 2 shakes, and I was in a great deal of discomfort. But they put some nitroglycerin underneath my tongue, and everything kind of settled down. And I had quite an ordeal at the hospital because COVID had made the hospital full, and there was no room at the inn, and so
Yeah.
I had to be put into a room without any windows. They didn't have the room for me to get into the surgical lineup. I was there for a week, 10 days. Next thing you know, after one of the scans that they did, they said, well, we can't operate on you before we take out your furthest back wisdom tooth. There's a little infection in there because I guess anything in your mouth goes right into your bloodstream.
Yeah.
So now,
So wait, you had to have the wisdom tooth removed before they can do the heart surgery?
They would not cut me until I
Wow.
had that tooth extracted. So now it's 2 weeks, and I'm just sitting around in a room without any windows. And I sniffled once, and my daughter, who lives in Chicago, said, Dad, I'll bet you got COVID while you were here. I go, there's no way. I feel fine. And the doctor said, we can test him for that. Well, they gave me the test, and he came back in what looked like a spacesuit to me. And he said, why do you think I'm dressed this way? I said, because you're going to a really good party tonight? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So then I got COVID while I was in the hospital. Now I had to go to another room, but thank God it had a window. Oh, I was so glad.
All right, so you're moving upstream.
10 days without any visitors or anything. I had plenty of time to pray and to think about what was going on. And, when they did the test on me, they said, well, we did the test, and no, it's not just a stent that you're going to need. We're going to have to do open heart surgery on you. We're going to cut your sternum in half. We're going to pull your ribs apart, and not only do you need a triple bypass, but you need a new heart valve transplant as well. We use a bovine valve, but don't worry, they said we can do it all at one time. And they said that I would be asleep. I would be in surgery for over 8 hours. They said that my heart would be stopped for over 4 hours, that I would be on a heart-lung machine, that surgeons would hold my heart and cut it apart and put it back together again, and that they would cool my blood that went through this machine so that they actually refrigerate you so that you slow down, and that I would wake up and that I hopefully would have a new valve and have, new circulation, and that I could really get oxygen to my brain and to my organs. And I don't care how many procedures you went through, to know that that's what you're going to do it's quite a spiritual confrontation to say, because, you just start to think about your life a little bit differently, and it can be quite emotional. And so there were a number of things that came to me that were revelations while I was there. There's 3.
Like what? Share if you don't mind, share something.
Sure. Okay. So these are such important things that I learned while I was there. Number one was that in all our lives, we can be faced with a situation that looks like absolute disaster on the surface, but that disaster may not be a disaster. It may be a gateway to a much better life situation and a much better spiritual situation than we had ever imagined. You're faced with being debilitated and not even being able to carry yourself, being dependent on the skill and the love and the care of other people, and that you may never be the same again and that your life will be cut short. But it may be a gateway to a much better life, and that is what it was in my case so far. Number two was that we think we're alone, and I was blown away. There were people I hadn't talked to for 30 years that poured their love on me. I got notes from hundreds of people that were praying for me. When I went into that operating room, I was not alone. I felt Christ himself. I felt the angels, and I felt friends and relatives. Like I had an army with me when I went in there. I had more support than I could ever imagine. And then the third thing that all people come to a Golgotha, to a Calvary in their life, where there's no way that they can solve their problem. You're totally at the mercy of the other people or the situation itself. And whether we deserve it or not, that there is a spiritual element that always comes to give us the courage, the patience, the support, the understanding by those that depend on us, so that we can be healed. And God himself and the power that moves the planet is the same power that moves the healing process within my very heart. And so I came to that realization that in most cases we need to use effort, but in some cases it's time to surrender fully. That idea of isihia, iremia, to be like a reflection of water that doesn't move.
Stillness. It's the complete stillness.
Right. That tradition is such a big part of the monastic movement. Isihia. I mean, and it's interesting because, all the things that we see that are for our health in today's modern medicine are the same as they were in our ancient traditions all along, like intermittent fasting,
right.
Not eating meat byproducts, not eating eggs and cheese and all these things. We need a break from that. Our church knows that. Our faith knows that. And so I realized that even within the greatest illness, the allness of God is still there, and that we can relax in it. And when we do, rather than letting our minds, and it's not easy, when we can settle ourselves down, our healing process works better than anything that we could do personally to try to make it happen, in letting go and letting the power of God work, the power of healing, the power of nature. In surrendering to that, we have the absolute best outcome possibilities that we can. So, and those things are true for all people, not just me being in a hospital waiting to be in a major surgical situation. And I took it upon myself to report and blog a little bit about what was happening because I said, what's my responsibility in this? My
Right.
responsibility is to have the courage to show others too that they can do it, And then I wrote this piece the night before I went into surgery after waiting almost a month in a hospital without being able to leave. I wrote this piece called Effort and Surrender. And another friend had surgery on his neck near his coronary artery there, and he said he was in a full-blown panic and he was not going to go to surgery. And after he read what I wrote, it calmed him down enough, and he said a prayer, and he said it gave him a little insight and a little power to say his prayer and then let go. And he said that what he read from me really helped, and that made me feel so good because we can all help each other, When I was in Sunday school, we had these yellow Bibles that they gave out that said, "Come receive the light." And it had quotes in the back of it from the saints. And I will be forever informed and influenced by a quote that I read from St. Basil that said, "The Spirit is everywhere present and shared without being divided. But to the degree that we serve others, we understand or experience the Spirit." In other words, when we have our hat out asking God for stuff, we'll get the help, but we don't feel the Holy Spirit. We feel the sense of power and Spirit in our service to others. That's where it shows up on our radar screens. And so if we want to heal, the best healers are wounded survivors. People that have been burned will not even listen to anyone. But when the burn victim comes in and says, "I've been through what you've been through and I can help you."
Yeah.
I remember going to a burn conference where I was doing some work for a foundation, and there was a man there that had been burned all over his entire body when he was 12 years old. He jumped out of his school window on fire. He had gone on to get his PhD, to be the pastor of his church, to have a wife, to have children, to have grandchildren. And he sat at that podium. He had a wig on. He had a suit on. He held a pen between crinkled fingers that couldn't extend. And he was at that podium, and he said, "We have to be more than survivors. In Christ, we have to be victors." And it had such an effect on me.
Yeah.
Because life always gives us the stick, but do we get the right end of it? Like, are we...
Yeah.
Like, we think that it's the worst thing because we're being punished or we're sick or whatever, but can we learn the lesson that is there for us to learn? I think that there's a great deal of power in that, and great deal of overcoming. And as you said in your introduction, it's the people that do things that make things happen. That's where the faith is the most dynamic. And healing is just such a great demonstration of our ability to have faith, one of my favorite quotes is that when you pray, believe in your heart that what you ask for, it's already been given to you, and it will be so.
Yeah.
And then so it's more than just say, I believe in. Faith is more than a belief in something. It is a jump off a platform that we've been given that says, I'm going to let go, and I'm going to deal with whatever happens because I'm going in the right direction. But I always feel like if we take one step towards what we intend on, towards what we want, God always takes 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 steps towards us, And so to be part of it where you test that and see the dynamic process, and I just feel so lucky because I couldn't even blow into a tube that made a little plastic ball that weighed nothing go up in the air when I came out of surgery. In fact, my lungs collapsed when I was in the ICU, and they had taken the breathing tube out of me, and all these doctors came in. They were looking at all my charts, and they were all whispering to each. I know that something's wrong. I said, I know that something's wrong.
Right.
You can tell. And then so one of the surgical nurses there said, Mr. Kastaris, you have to, I don't care how much it hurts, you have to breathe deeper and more and harder, or else we're going to lose you. And for a second, I said, "What's the date today?" I wanted to know the day I died.
That's crazy. Now, did they appreciate why you were asking, or was that just kind of like what's?
I only did that for a while because there's work to be done. I get on it. Okay.
Okay. All right. There you go.
And it was hurting, and I always use the imagery, and I was imagining that my lungs were like these two envelopes that were just closed and flat, and I said, I got to get those pieces of paper separated. And so I got a little air in there, and they were all encouraging me. And I got to the point where they say, "Yes, your numbers are better. You're going to make it." And I mean, it was pretty dramatic. It was interesting, but it was the beginning of how I feel today, and I feel fantastic. I mean,
really?
I've got oxygen-rich blood, going through my veins. I've got a new valve. Last week I walked. Every day of the week I go to rehab 3 days a week, and then I'll just either ride my bike or walk on a treadmill on my own. And rode my bike an hour on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and I also became a vegan and when it was Lent anyway. It was already Lent anyway. So I said,
perfect timing.
I'm going to try to just go without animal products for Lent and see how that goes. And I'm having so much fun. I made vegan moussaka day before yesterday, and I created something that tastes so meaty with portobello mushrooms, crushed walnuts, and broccoli that's toasted and stuff. And then, it's amazing. There's a million plants to pick from. There's only so many meats, and so it becomes another challenge, another adventure, and it's really been a lot of fun. And like I say, I thought it was a disaster, but I might be living the healthiest life that I ever could because of what happened. And I am committed to having my wheels on my bike rather than my chair for the next 25 years, Bill.
There you go. That's what I wanted to hear. I mean, look, Rip, normally I would interrupt and ask questions, but brother, you were on a roll. You delivered the best homily I think I've heard in a very, very long time. And I'm really, really grateful, but it's how you ended it, to say that you've been through the ordeal. I mean, I know you went in with uncertainty, and you got a new tooth pulled, you got a new valve, you got a new heart, your lungs are better. I mean, good Lord, COVID, so you got antibodies. I mean, but brother, you've been through it all. And I will tell you that I don't know how much you kept up with your own Facebook page and hosting and stuff like that. But I was part of that long army of people contributing in there. And I will tell you, it was awesome to see everybody's prayers and hope. And I think the point that you said about how, even when we feel like we are alone in our illness and our disease and our pain, we are not alone. Not only is the Lord with us, not only are the angels and the archangels and the seraphim and cherubim, but all of the people whose lives we've touched and who are praying for us are part of it. And you've just done such a beautiful, beautiful job of capturing that. I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful. So what's next? What's next for Rip Kastaris? Let me let you look to the future and tell me where you're going from here in terms of living and continuing to live that calling now that you've been given that not second chance, but that well-deserved revival.
I do feel like I have a responsibility now that I do have another chance. I've had two friends that had heart attacks this month. One of them made it, and one of them did not.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
And so just to know that life is precious is a lesson in itself. And it's been difficult, Bill, because when you're trying to heal and get your life back in order, like if you're at the hospital 4 days a week, man, I'm used to putting in really long hours, and so I can't do that. Can't stay up all night anymore, because I got to take care of myself. And but I pray that, and I'm just about. I'll be out of cardiac rehab soon, and I'm working on stuff all the time where I can be helpful to others. I'm actually doing a film for our priests, 25 years at our parish right now.
Wonderful.
Making the film on that. I am involved at the metropolis level to be the judge in our metropolis. When we do the Oratorical Festival, you also, in our metropolis, which is not true in all of them, you can chant or you can make iconography and be judged on that as well, which they're so kind to make sure that I get involved with that, even though they might do it in Chicago and I'm in St. Louis. They have me come up, and it's such an honor to be part of that. But, I mean, like we're the go-to guys for certain creative things with our parish, and not only on a local level, but at the metropolis level and then at a national level. It's always great to help Greek institutions like the Elio Society or the Hellenic Spirit. I mean, the National Hellenic Society. Yeah, I get a chance to help the AHI with what they do in Washington D.C. and so, I mean, I just pray that I continue to stay healthy so that I can express the life in me. Like, art has always been my way. I couldn't do my assignments but I was drawing and painting every day. I got a little watercolor set from a friend of my daughter's, and that was the kindest gift. Had all this watercolor paper and this watercolor, and I was just making images of hearts and
I saw some of them. They're incredible.
It was a study. It was a meditation on the mechanics of what was going on inside of me, but also that idea of healing and of how the heart is so much more than just a muscle. I have an idea. I would love to. I've been posting the pictures of the food with the tomatoes and all the vegetables and the.
You're going to do a cooking show now? You're going to go into cooking?
I would love to do a book called Recipes and Art from a Mending Heart. And,
I love it.
It would be healing from the vegan kitchen, And
I love it.
It would be my story and kind of a diary of what happened. And I mean, I can't help but I made movies about what was, I mean, but just short little films. It was snowing outside. It was just, but through art, we can inspire. And that's my job. That is my job, to bring a vision to people so that they can be empowered. Our icons are not the thing, but they're a touchstone to eternity. They are the windows to heaven, and we can, through art and through communication, touch people at a level that nothing else can. When I show my art and icons, that series of Broken Angels that you talked about, people come in and talk about the miraculous to me as if they've known me all their lives. I hear about the healings and about the special synchronistic kind of moments that they had in their lives, how their son or daughter was about to be lost, but that God had an effect on their situation and that they'll forever be grateful, and how all things come together. And so I just feel like I have both a responsibility and a job to continue to make images that touch that part of people's lives, which is what art has always been. People may not realize this, but did you know that in all the museums in the world, 85% of the paintings and art pieces in those museums are about either the angelic or the heavenly realm of things,
I did not know that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they used to say, anthropologists used to say, that humans were the animals that made tools. But so many animals are using tools these days that now they define man as the animal who makes art. And
I love it.
We can see, I mean, we can retrace everything about who we are especially being Greek Orthodox, because the imagery and the iconography is such an integral part of who we are and what we do. When I teach about the architecture and the art, Hagia Sophia in itself is a musical instrument. When you say one little word, when you hum, when you drone, it bounces off of all those hard surfaces. Right. The light moves and changes coming through those little windows as the incense from the smoke from the incense goes through there. It is a transformative experience where we have that revelation where, there is more to me than this bag of bones that I was born in. There is, and regardless of what you believe in, the church is the place where the theologian Paul Tillich said, it's the place where we consider issues of greatest concern. It's where you think about what your relationship is to your wife, to your kids, to your grandparents that are no longer there, to your mom and dad. You look up at the saints, they look back at you. They're not smiling. They're concerned. They're praying for us, but they're all inviting us to be part of an eternal community, to help each other, to love each other as Christ loved us. And every one of those saints is like a ball player that has like a card that has statistics that we could never live up to, you know?
Right.
But we could still be part of that team. Anybody that can. Anybody, we're all invited to that party, and we're all invited to contribute. Unfortunately or unfortunately, it comes in the form of pick up your mat and walk.
There you go. There you go. Well, brother, I got to tell you, you have done such a beautiful job of sharing not only the vision of what you see in your immensely creative mind, but also the faith that your father and that the forefathers and grandfathers and everybody else and grandmothers and everybody else placed in you, and for you to be still inspiring others by sharing your incredible art is just going to be an amazing, amazing gift. And I look forward to seeing that next series that you're going to do. For those of you that are interested, you can find Rip's work at RIP Kastaris, Kastaris, ripkastaris.com. And you can see some of the amazing iconography he's done, some of the incredible pictures and paintings, and including, modern features, the work that he did for the Olympic athletes. You can see the incredible job that he worked on, that I was blessed to be working with him on, the Kiklo Circle of Glory, the completion of that beautiful visual imagery of the Olympic movement. And my brother, I hope and pray that you continue to have many, many, many years of useful and productive art. I thank God that you're still with us, that you're still kicking around. You better stay on your bicycle and eating your vegan diet and doing all the right things, because I just got to see more of your beautiful art. So thank you so much for everything you've done and everything you're going to do. And God bless you, my brother. Okay.
God bless you, Bill. You're doing great work, and I appreciate you having me on your show. It's an honor, and so good for us to reconnect again. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, God bless, and I hope you have a joyous wedding for your daughter coming up and your trip to Greece. Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to take another short break right now, and when we return, my second guest, Tracy Namee, and I are going to continue the discussion of living your stewardship calling after a diagnosis of a serious illness. And again, we would welcome your calls or your questions at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. We'll take a short break and be right back.
Bill will be right back, but the lines are open if you want to ask a question or offer your thoughts. The number is 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Reading through the entire Bible in just 1 year. To an average person in today's busy world, it seems like a daunting challenge. But in the Orthodox Daily Scriptures podcast, Father Alexis Khoury makes it a journey that is not only rewarding, but simple and accessible as well.
They buried their bones under the oak tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So Saul died for his lawlessness, which he committed against the Lord according to the word of the Lord, because he did not keep it, and because Saul sought counsel of a wizard, and Samuel the prophet answered him. So he slew him and turned the kingdom over to David.
To find this podcast and others like it, you can go to ancientfaith.com.
Stewardship Calling is back, and we are ready for your call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Bill Marianis.
So we want to welcome you back to Stewardship Calling in our first Wednesday program, where my upcoming special guest is Tracy Namee, as we continue our discussion of living your stewardship calling after a diagnosis of a serious illness. Now, Tracy is a lifelong resident of Kansas. She's the youngest of 5 siblings and was raised at St. Mary Antiochian Church in Wichita, where one of her grandfathers was a founder and another one served as a parish priest for several years. Tracy and her husband, Eric, who's been a guest on my program here several times, have been married for 42 years. And as I remind him, the statute of limitations has expired, right? But they literally grew up together at St. Mary and began dating when they were both working in youth ministry together. So see there, some marriages can happen through church youth ministry. Tracy has 3 sons and 6 grandchildren. She was a realtor and also a stay-at-home mother and a massive volunteer at her kids' schools and at her church. And since retiring from her realtor gig in 2012, she's served on several boards and volunteered with nonprofits and continued a very, very active work schedule with her church. Tracy was blessed to be a teen sponsor at St. Mary for many years and volunteered for the Wichita Area Sexual Assault Center as a survivor advocate for over 3 years. She's also served as a board member for ICTSOS, a local organization whose mission is really focused on stopping human trafficking. She's also served on the board of directors of the Treehouse, a ministry of Orthodox churches in Wichita who serve mothers and babies who are in difficult financial situations, and currently serves on the board of Christ the Savior Orthodox Christian School and the St. Mary Parish Council. Now, the first time I got to work with Tracy was when she was the leader of the strategic planning efforts at her home parish at St. Mary. And she then stayed on to work on implementing that strategic plan. In proof that no good deed goes unpunished, Tracy did such an amazing job with that strategic plan implementation that when I finished the strategic plan for the Orthodox Christian Prison Ministry, her husband Eric threw her under the bus again to help manage the implementation of that strategic plan. Now, her health was always good until she was diagnosed with breast cancer 8 years ago, and she underwent a mastectomy and follow-up reconstructive surgery. But as if that was not enough, she suffered a heart attack 5 years ago while her mother was in the hospital dying. And she ended up having to have a stent implanted the very same day that her mother passed from this life. So never letting her cancer or heart attack stop her, Tracy continues to remain a dedicated and engaged Orthodox Christian who trusts in the Lord, but continues to live her stewardship calling by serving the Lord's church and his ministries wherever and whenever she can. So Tracy, it's so great to speak with you again and welcome you to Stewardship Calling here on Ancient Faith Radio.
Thanks so much, Bill. It's good to be here.
Now, I just gave your bio too, but gosh, there's so much more to you than that simple bio. So why don't you share with us a little bit more about your upbringing and background?
Wow, I don't know. You pretty much covered it there. The only thing I think maybe that I could add to that is that being raised in the Orthodox Church in Wichita and having stayed here for my entire life, with the exception of a few years that my husband and I went away while he was at law school, I've been very blessed to be surrounded by people that I've grown up with and shared the faith with, which is really, I'm not someone who has been able to just move around a lot. So for me, that's been a real blessing. I'm still friends with people that I grew up with in the church, and I'm very close to my family. My parents had 5 kids, but we were very spread out. My oldest sister is 15 years older than I am, but she's like my best friend. And,
wow.
They just always instilled in us, faith and family. Those were the 2 things. And even though we're all very old now, that hasn't changed.
Come on, you're not that old.
Yeah, we are. But it hasn't changed at all. I mean, we still cherish every time that we're together and plan outings together. And so that faith and family is really what has been the defining part of my life for 65 years.
And it's so powerful that actually came from your parents, of course, but also from the community around you, because
Right.
the one thing that I observed as a visitor to St. Mary in Wichita is that, and again, I know there's a lot of family members at the parish. I think everybody's related to somebody somehow, but regardless of that, even the people that were new there were immediately embraced as if they were part of the family. And of course, we're embraced into the faith. And I think so that has permeated not only your biological family, but also your church community family.
Absolutely, it has. And in fact, what you said is kind of funny that, everybody's related to everybody. When I was growing up, that was the case, but not now. Honestly, I would say there's only maybe 25% of us who are related to one another. My husband would probably disagree because he doesn't like my statistics. But honestly, we have been so blessed with an amazing group of people who have joined us in our family. And you're right, it's an incredible family. And that feeling that I have for my own biological family is how I feel about my church family. So I credit my parents for that, honestly.
Well, they obviously did a great job, and I will tell you, I don't think I've ever told you this before, but I use y'all as an example in many stories that I tell in other communities. But one of the ones that gets the most laughs was, I remember right when we were getting ready to have one of our multi-day strategic planning retreats. And you had several of the strategic planning team members who had just given birth or not too long ago given birth, and they brought their babies, their infants, to some of the sessions, and it was kind of like it was amazing because I'd look up from the board or whatever the case may be, and there was a different person holding the brand new baby, and it was just kind of like, it wasn't like a football that was being passed around. It's just like people were fighting to be the one that would just hold and love on that baby, and I think that's a testament to the community that you've created there. So God bless you for that.
Thank you.
Now, I also I kind of went at a very high level the incredible, tumultuous journey you've had through health issues. So why don't you share with everybody a little bit more about what you're comfortable saying about the serious health issues that you've experienced and are dealing with?
Sure. Any woman who's listening who's old enough to have had mammograms knows that you go in, you do the thing, and they come back out and say, good to go, and come back next year. And occasionally they say, yeah, we need to take another look. And that's happened to me several times, and I just, okay, after the first time, and they continue to, everything's fine. You don't worry too much about it. But about 8 years ago, they came out and said, we need to take another look. And I rolled my eyes and said, oh, okay. And, here we go, did it again. And they sent me home and called me the next day and said, we need you to come back. We're just not sure. So I went back in again. I really wasn't worried. I just assumed, no, not yet. Went back in and they said, I think we better do a little bit of a needle biopsy, just to be sure. And I can remember one of the things that really stuck with me. I knew it was going to be a few days before I found out. And I let my kids know, and none of them lived in Wichita at the time. And my middle son said, okay, Mom, call me the minute you hear. And I said, no, I said, I'm not worried about it. So if you hear from me, you'll know that it's not a good thing. But if you don't hear from me, then there's no problem, right?
Yeah, no news is good news kind of thing, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. And I called him, and when I found out, and his first thing was, Mom, you're calling me.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when it hit me, because when my doctor called me, he said, where are you? And I said, I'm driving to the church. What do you need? And he said, you call me back when you're not driving. And I said, hey, I'm fine. I don't fall apart easily. Just what is it? And he said, well, this is a malignant melanoma. A malignant cancer. And I need to get you exactly what you said when you were introducing the first guest. I have some bad news, right?
Yeah.
And I need to get you in to see a specialist. And then I, of course, called my husband, and then I did call my sons. And as I said, it wasn't until my middle son said, Mom, you're calling me, that I thought, oh, this isn't a good thing, huh? This could be bad. And at the time, we had 2 parishioners and 2 women in our parish who were going through or had just gone through breast cancer, and and their outcomes were very difficult. And so, I knew it could be bad, but to be really honest with you, Bill, I never really thought, okay, I'm going to fall apart. My first question to him was, my doctor, what do we got to do?
Yeah, what's next?
And that's how I approached it. From the beginning, that's how I approached it. When we did go in, and I had to have a special, MRI done and this whole thing, and they told me that it was large enough that I had to have a mastectomy, and I was going to likely need radiation and chemotherapy. Again, it was okay, let's do this, kind of putting on the armor and let's go to battle.
No doubts, no questions, no second,
No, I didn't, to be honest with you.
Okay.
However, a very dear priest friend of ours found out about it and sent us some oil from the Icon in Taylor, Pennsylvania. And
the Weeping Icon, yeah.
Right. I was anointed with that and went into surgery expecting, this is going to be just the beginning of a very long journey. When they went in, the tumor had shrunk enough that I was no longer going to have radiation and chemotherapy. It was on that, cutoff when it's just small enough.
Yeah.
You still have to have a mastectomy, but it's still small enough that was a miracle to me. I mean, I knew I was going to have chemotherapy. This thing was big.
Yeah.
And it wasn't big anymore. It was small enough that I was able to forego the chemotherapy. And there was still a question about radiation. There's a whole process you have to go through with genetic testing of your tumor and all these things. And I was just so blessed because it all came back that I didn't have to have any of that. And therein began my reconstructive process. And my brother is a plastic surgeon. He did not do my surgery, but he was definitely the one who, was there to guide me through what everything was going to entail. And honestly, I just never thought this is the end of the world. I never thought it's over. It was really putting on the armor and, okay, let's go to battle. That's how I felt.
So, and again, and maybe you can answer, maybe you can't answer. I don't know. Why? Why did you think that way? I mean, this is not, you know the statistics. You're highly educated, highly trained. You've lived and survived and watched people die of this. You've read the stories. This isn't like you were ignorant about all these things. You were a very, very smart person. So what was it that caused you to have that just like, okay, next step?
Because part of it, I talked to my mom who was, in her late 80s at that time. And well, actually she was in her 90s by that time. She had been through a lot of illnesses in her life, and Mom was a very, very faithful woman. And it was really kind of talking to her a little bit and hearing that, honey, you can only control what you can control.
Right.
And like you spoke earlier, this is out of your control. So if you want to stress and will make it worse. I mean, we know stress has a terrible effect on the body. You can do that, or you can realize that you're in God's hands. That may mean that you are healed. It may mean that you're not. And that is a realization that I had to come to, and a peace that I had to have about that. And I know that no matter what, he loves me, and I will be in his hands. And therefore, if I am going to get through this and be a survivor, then I've got a reason, and there's got to be work that he's got for me to do.
Bingo.
And if I'm not, then he's ready for me.
Yeah.
And that was how I approached it, Bill.
That is so powerful, and that is so awesome. Was there any? Did the medical experts have any explanation for how the tumor had decreased in size, other than the anointing of the myrrh and the
No,
miracle?
I don't think so. I mean, I was pretty out of it, and Eric was the one who was there getting all the information. But no, I mean, I had that that sonogram very shortly before the surgery and then
Right.
the anointing, and
Right.
so there was no mistake between the sonogram and the MRI that this was the size it was.
Right.
And then when the surgeon went in, there was no mistake that, well, this is the size it is now. Um, no, I don't believe they had any explanation for him at all. And, I never asked because I just trusted that God, as I said, if I was going to continue on this planet, then he needed me to get to work, roll up my sleeves. And I had just pretty much finished raising my children. And it was, I was trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
And I did lots of volunteer work at the church, and like you said, I worked at the school, whatever. But there had to be something more than that. And
Right.
if I was going to be here, then I needed to ask him, what is it that you want me to do? And that's the journey I've been on for 8 years.
But along this journey of yours, after a miracle, and I don't need medical science to confirm this. I don't need theologians to confirm this. I'm declaring it a miracle because there's no other explanation in your story. But as you are dealing with the difficulties that your blessed mother was going through, something else got shipped your way. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. My mom was just such an amazing human being. And when she was starting to decline at 95, I might add, and still living
that
alone,
bodes well for you. I mean, all things considered. I mean, I'm not a geneticist, but that's good news.
Yeah, that's good news. But she was still going to the gym. She still drove. I mean, this woman was a force of nature. And she started to really decline just in that middle of that year, 5 years ago. And she really wanted to go to Taylor, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew traveling was going to be hard for her. But my sister and I decided that's what we were going to do. And so for her birthday and Mother's Day, which were in May, we said, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take you to Taylor. And so in June, we made a trek to Taylor, Pennsylvania with my mom. And originally she told us that her thought was, I'm going to go and get healed of all of these ailments that I have. She had several. And we were so, it was such a miraculous place to go. And I know Nikki will talk about that a little bit, but we, when they anointed my mother, when the priest anointed her, he didn't drop the oil into her hands from the icon. He actually dropped it on her head.
Oh.
And she said afterwards, we were very, of course, all in awe of what we had experienced. And on the way home from New York, we had stopped in New York and seen our son and my son. And on the way home, I said, she was really feeling physically poorly. Yeah. And I said, Mom, I know you didn't get the healing that you were looking for. And she said, no, you're right. I didn't. Something else happened.
What?
And after that time, she was the most peaceful and accepted her end of life illnesses with such grace and peace. And she just continued throughout the summer to suffer and in and out of the hospital. And finally in September, after being in and out of the hospital, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, the doctor said, you can keep doing this to her, in and out. And she still was very cognizant. Or you can let her decide what she wants to do, if she wants to continue all these invasive measures. And so they spoke to her, and she said, call my children in, basically, and said, kids, I'm done. I'm ready. So we're not going to keep up all this medication.
Right.
And that she really credited, and I think my sister would agree, to Taylor, to what she experienced in her heart, more of a, rather than a physical healing, it was more of a, I know now what I'm ready and what God needs from me.
She got what she needed. It was different than what she thought she needed, but God said, I got this. That's exactly
what she said. I was healed in a different manner,
right,
one that I can't even explain to you. So we moved her up to hospice at the hospital. We were at the hospital. They thought they'd have her there a couple of days and then move her home once they got her off the cocktail of medications she had been on. And within the first couple of days, we knew we weren't going to get home. She was in such pain. They were really having to give her too much painkiller. And my sisters and I spent the night with her in the hospice room, and my brothers would come up and then go home. And it was the night when we knew that she was near death, and she was no longer talking to us.
Right.
And we were all three asleep on these little cots in the bed on the floor. And I was awakened at about 1 o'clock in the morning with just horrible, kind of what your first guest was talking about.
What Rip said?
That like, what is, I can't, my chest feels like it's going to explode. And I got up and I tiptoed out of the room, and I'm walking around hospice, and one of the nurse's aides saw me and said, are you okay? And I said, I don't know. She went and got the nurse. And by the time the nurse got there, I was not okay. And so she went back to the room and awakened my oldest sister and said, I need you to come down to the ER with me, with your sister. And my oldest sister looked at my sister sleeping next to her, my next sister, and then looked at my mom sleeping in the bed and said, no, it's my mom.
Right.
The nurse was like, no, honey, your sister. And so down we went, and, we had to go to the ER, and in a long story, they couldn't figure out what happened, tried to tell me I had an anxiety attack. My mother's dying. And I was like, no, that's just not who I am. I don't do that. But
I've survived cancer, and I approached it straight on, said, what's next? Let's go next step up.
Exactly. So, this isn't me. But, so basically they said, we want to keep you. And I said, heck no, my mom is dying upstairs.
Right.
I'm right upstairs if I need to come back. And went back up there about 5 o'clock in the morning, went to bed, and about 7:30, 7:45, we all woke up, and the nurse came in and said, your mom is very near, and she passed within about 5 minutes. And I said to my sister, please, I don't want to talk about this when my brothers get up here, because mom just died, and we don't know whether it was an anxiety attack. Let's just be quiet. Okay. Right. And she said, I will be quiet on one condition. And that is that you go in
negotiating.
You go get the test that the doctor wanted you to get that shows whether or not you had a heart attack.
Fair enough. That's fair.
Fair enough. That's fair. I can do that. So on my way home from, leaving the hospital, I'm almost in my driveway, and I remember my sister's words, and I thought, oh man, and I called my doctor, and he said, come on in, let's see what it is. Took my blood. I went back home. We went to the mortuary. I got a call in the middle of the process. My doctor, how are you? Like, I'm fine, except that I'm planning my mother's funeral. What?
I'm at a funeral parlor for my mom. What do you expect, right?
And he's like, I need you to go to the hospital right now. You had a heart attack. And I said, okay, but can I finish planning my mom's funeral? And no.
Tracy, you like negotiating, but I'm sorry, no.
I felt fine. But I went to the hospital, and, it was an odyssey from that point on. Had the stent put in, had a terrible reaction to the nitroglycerin, was in the hospital for 2.5 days, didn't get to plan my mother's funeral, and got out just in time to be at her funeral. And so, it was a bit of a roller coaster there, and it took me a long time to mourn my mother because of that.
Sure.
But again, that wake up, that you're still here with it. What's your plan, girlfriend? What's your plan? And my plan has been to dive in to whatever he puts in front of me.
Oh,
and he's put a lot.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? So like I cut that deal with God a few years ago too, where I basically said, I'm going to say yes to whoever you put in front of me. So you better be careful who you put in front of me because it's your fault, right?
Exactly.
So let's use that as the segue over here, Tracy. So kind of, you have dealt with both of the two biggies, right? Heart and cancer. You've dealt with the death of your mother. You've dealt with untold other things that, whatever. You received the miracle of anointment, and yet somehow you've kept your faith throughout all of it. You kept your stoic one step at a time, one day at a time. Let's go forward. So what is it? What do you have a sense yet of what you think the Lord is continuing calling you to do right now? What's next, at least? I mean, what's on the agenda?
Well, I think if you asked Eric, he would say,
no, I'm not asking him. I'm asking you. I don't care what he thinks because you're the boss of you, okay?
To help with all of his endeavors. But I think that I've spent many of the last 5 years, I spent 3 of them working, as you said, at the Sexual Assault Center.
Yeah.
And it really opened my eyes to a lot of very sad things in our world. And because I feel like I'm a pretty strong person,
you are.
It's allowed me to be able to help those people who are in situations where they can't be strong, where it's just too horrific to be strong. And so, that has been something that has been extremely meaningful to me. And that I felt that was part of a calling to me.
That's awesome.
And then my youth ministry, I feel very connected to the youth that I work with, and the impact that I hope just being that relationship person with them has for their long-term Orthodox faith. But, and ultimately, and I laugh about Eric, but I couldn't have probably, I don't think, gone through all of this without his, hand at my back.
Yeah.
Just that strength that he gives to say, you know what, you got this, and we got this together. And so having someone, and that was part of the reason I wanted to do the volunteer work that I did at the Assault Center, was that a lot of people, 90% of the people that I had in the hospital didn't have anybody with them. And they didn't have somebody at their back going, you've got this, either because they were too ashamed to have anybody come with them, or because they didn't have anyone. And so I could be that person who could put their hand on their back and say, we got this, we got it. And so that's been part of it. I'm still searching, Bill. I don't think he's done with me.
Good.
I think he has more that he has expecting me to find that he wants me to do. And I pray for that every day, that he shows me what his will for my life is, because I am still here. By his grace, I'm still here.
Well, the work you have done is extraordinary. The work you continue to do on a daily basis is exemplary. Your dedication and steadfast faith is just really also an example. And I'm grateful that you were willing. I know I had to do a little arm twisting, but I'm grateful that you were willing to serve witness, because I think, Tracy, just as you talked about providing that family environment in your wonderful parish and with your own family, and now creating that loving environment for those women who are dealing with things where they don't have the rest of their family around them, I think that is a continuation of the values that were implanted by your parents and your grandparents and the faithful around you, and that you're continuing to do with your children and now grandchildren. So God bless you for that. But I'm going to give you something that Eric probably never gives you, and that's the final word. So are there any final words that you would like to offer?
Bill, that man may not give me the final word, but I take it, honey, all the time.
I love it. I love it.
My final word would be that, every person that I encounter, I know that they are dealing with something. It may not be a physical health issue. It may not be a mental health issue or a spiritual health issue, but everyone is dealing with something. And even if the only thing I can do is be a presence that is a positive presence, that is a loving presence, then I think that is my ultimate goal, is to look at every person and to see beyond what they're just showing me, and to also try to see Christ in everyone, and to try to have everyone see Christ in me. Because without that, I mean, there really, what else is there? There is nothing. So that would be my final word, is that I'm grateful for this gift that he's given me. I hope that I don't ever waste it, and that I am a good steward of the talents and the time. And that I'm continuing to be open to whatever he puts in front of me.
And that is ultimately the direction of a good steward, is to take the gifts and the opportunities that God gives you and to fulfill them for his greater glory. And in your case, to be the actual personification of John 13:34. By this they will know you are my disciples, that you have love for one another. And so, Tracy, I can't thank you enough again for everything you have done, everything you are doing, and I'm sure now everything you're going to do. I thank you for also having the courage to come forward and share what are very personal and difficult stories. I thank you for the courage that you've demonstrated and the faith that you've modeled, and for everything else you do. So you get the rest of the evening off, okay? So have a cocktail, I'm going to take a short break right now, and when we return, my third and final guest, Nikki Bober, is going to be here to kind of wrap this all up together as we discuss how we go forward in living our stewardship calling after a diagnosis of a serious illness. Again, we would welcome any calls at 1-855-237-2346. 1-855-AF-RADIO. So let's take a short break, and we'll be right back.
Bill will be right back, but the lines are open if you want to ask a question or offer your thoughts. The number is 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Are you curious about the Orthodox Christian faith?
Do you have questions about Orthodox Christianity that you can't trust strangers in internet forums to answer?
Are you an Orthodox Christian looking for a reliable first place to send your interested friends?
Do you need help finding an Orthodox church near you?
My name is Father Paul Hodge. I serve in the Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese of North America.
My name is Father Joseph Lucas. I serve in the Orthodox Church in America.
My name is Father Anthony Cook. I serve in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America.
And I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick, Chief Content Officer of Ancient Faith Ministries and a priest of the Antiochian Archdiocese. And we're the Orthodox Intro team.
If you're looking for a first stop online to get an introduction to the Orthodox faith,
a place to get answers to questions from qualified Orthodox Christian clergy,
a place to send your friends and not just toss them into the chaos of the internet,
a place to get help finding an Orthodox parish and get plugged into an actual Orthodox community, then point your web browser at orthodoxintro.org. OrthodoxIntro.org is a free service of Ancient Faith Ministries and made possible by our donors. It's an Orthodox on-ramp to the Christian life. Again, that's OrthodoxIntro.org.
Stewardship Calling is back, and we are ready for your call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Bill Marianis.
Welcome back to Stewardship Calling and our first Wednesday program in the third and final segment, where my special guest, Nikki Bober, and I will be discussing how we live our stewardship callings after a diagnosis of a serious disease or illness. Now, we're going to complete our swing through the Midwest from Kansas to Missouri and now to Ohio, because Nikki was actually born in Akron, Ohio, and baptized at the Annunciation Akron Greek Orthodox Church. But at the age of 7, her family left the Orthodox Church and became Protestant evangelicals. And it wasn't until about 25 years later that her family returned to Orthodoxy. And it was her mother who had heard a voice in a dream saying, "It's time to go back and feed your people." And she didn't say anything to Nikki's father, but 2 days later, her father told her mother that he had had a dream, and lo and behold, it was the same one about going back and feeding the people. And so they returned. Now, Nikki met and married her husband, Dr. John, in 1984, and they've been married for almost 38 years. They have 2 children who are also both active in ministries at Annunciation GOC. And while living away from Akron, she was actually active in ministries in the GOA in Columbus, at an OCA church in Kansas City and Columbus, and an Antiochian church at Wichita, Kansas. I wish this girl would make up her mind. No, but seriously, she's been actively engaged in church work everywhere she goes. And the Bober family returned to Annunciation Akron in 2007. Nikki is very active and enthusiastic board member of the Orthodox Christian Women of Akron, which is a pan-Orthodox organization since 2008. She's served as president twice, from 2013 to 15 and 19 to 21. She's participated in book studies each year and was also instrumental in bringing some of the great Lenten retreat speakers, such as my fellow Ancient Faith Radio colleagues, Father Barnabas Powell and Father Dr. Nicholas Lowe. Nikki's been a board member of the Philopticos at Annunciation for more than 10 years, and she's chaired the very successful backpack program for the past 10 years. She was instrumental in leading the drive to gather school supplies for the children also. She's actively involved in the program to donate furniture to Harry Donovan Jr. Valor Home, which is a home for homeless veterans. She was also a member of the Daughters of Penelope Annunciation GOC about 10 years and served as co-president for 2 years. She worked out about 3 times a week. She's a very, very healthy individual. She had a little bit of IBS, but okay. But that was clearly understandable given the issue that her mother was facing in the hospital for an extended period of time before she passed away. But right after Thanksgiving, she started having a lingering dry cough. And with all the COVID restrictions, doctor visits were only by telehealth, and the primary doctor treated her for bronchitis. But nothing seemed to help, and nothing seemed to solve the lingering cough. So finally, she got a chest x-ray that showed fluid in the lungs, and after subsequent CT scans and blood work and an MRI, a lung tumor was discovered. But it wasn't until February 18th, 2021, that Nikki Bober's life changed dramatically, as her oncologist informed her that she had stage 4 metastatic lung cancer. The main tumor was in the lung, and there was a lesion in the L5 vertebrae, which caused horrific pain. Now, obviously, to say this was a shock was an understatement, but, kind of the logical question that you would raise to an oncologist is, how do I go from being totally fit and having never smoked to having stage 4 lung cancer? But as it turned out, Nikki was told that 20% of the people who have lung cancer never smoke. And soberly, my guest tonight was told that the median survival period for this disease was only about 8 months with no treatment, or 3 years with treatment. Now, lung cancer can typically go to the brain if it's left to itself. But in Nikki's case, the biopsy and the MRI of the brain and the spine showed that she had not yet experienced any spread of that cancer. So in March, she underwent 10 radiation treatments that proved to be only one of 15 to 20% of the people who actually qualify to take chemo orally. But don't think that's a great privilege, because she took about 20 pills daily, including a lot of pain medication, and is now currently taking chemo pill and taking infusions of Zometa, which strengthens the bones. But in amazing good news, in June of 2021, one of her first CT scans showed that the lesion on the L5 was gone, and the main tumor in the lung had shrunk by 50%. And subsequent CT scans, I believe, have shown that there hasn't been continued growth as we continue to pray for a miracle. So without further ado, it's my great privilege to invite and welcome to Stewardship Calling and Ancient Faith Radio another good friend of mine, Nikki Bober. Nikki, are you still with us?
I'm still here, Bill.
All right. I know it's a long night for you and stuff like that. Now, again,
fine.
Just like I did with the other two, I gave your bio, but I want to give you a right of refusal here to offer up anything else about your journey or your CV or something about your upbringing and your background.
Well, you pretty much cover a lot of it. Like you say, I was out of the out of the church. I did the boomerang thing, unlike Rip and unlike Tracy, cradle Orthodox, stayed with it. Yes, my family left the church when I was 7 years old. They became, quote unquote, born again Christians. We went the evangelical route. But yet at the same token, Bill, my family too, though, my parents, before we left the church, they were Sunday school teachers. They taught the teens. They were also very involved. And at one point, we were even involved in a prison ministry.
Wow.
I think I was 12 years old. And at the time, we here in Akron, like my mom and I would go into, they let you go into the jail, into the cells actually at that time.
Wow.
And I remember as a kid, that my mom and I went to see the women. And then my dad was, over on the other side of the jail and went to visit the men. And we did that for a number of years. And then my dad, he eventually continued the prison ministry.
Oh, that's wonderful.
He used to travel. Well, this was back in the 70s, I believe. Yeah, it was like back in the mid 70s. And in Cleveland, there was a former football player, Bill Glass, and he played for the Browns. He did like Chuck Colson, and had the prison ministry thing.
Right.
So my dad was part of the Bill Glass Ministries actually, and he used to travel around and he went to the prisons and did with the ministry, and all at his own expense.
Wow.
And then eventually, when his health limited him and he couldn't travel anymore, he would correspond with inmates.
Wonderful.
And at one point he was corresponding with like over 100 inmates at one point. And so ministry has, I guess, always been in my DNA, with my parents of some sort. We were doing something,
Right.
So I've always felt blessed and wanted to give back. And it was just sort of second nature for me. But I have to tell you, though, too, when we did come back to the church, after 25 years, and we didn't speak Greek at home, so I really didn't understand. I mean, I could understand some of the Greek, some of the language, but, not fluently, So coming from an evangelical and then back into the Orthodox Church, it was quite an adjustment, I have to tell you. But, we knew that that's where God wanted us. And we knew, it was actually like a regrowth for me because I basically was starting out almost like a convert, even though I was a cradle Orthodox,
Well, it's been so long, sure. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And then, like you say, after we came back to the church, it was a year later that I met my husband, and he's a convert. And actually, I really learned more through him. And once we were married, and actually then when we were first married, we lived in Kansas City for about 15 months. He was still doing his residency there. And he was we attended an OCA parish there. And that was the first time, Bill, that I actually heard the liturgy all in English.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, it was like, oh, is this what they've been saying all this time? I mean, it really, it really, I mean, it was like God was like speaking to me or something. I mean, it just really resonated with me, and I felt like I was home. And, from then on, yes, I did, in whatever parish we were in, worked on different ministries or volunteered or, and then once I had the kids, I volunteered at their school and I was blessed to be a stay-at-home mom. So, again, giving back was it was second nature to me, whether it was at the kids' school or, in a church or whatever committee I was on, or it just felt good to give back.
Yeah.
And that was just something that was just instilled in me from a young age.
Right.
And so that's what I did. But it's been a blessing. I mean, it's wonderful to do and to help others. But I got to tell you, it's so rewarding. I just feel more blessed and more rewarding to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because that is true of anybody who really understands service and gives of themselves. Is there's almost sometimes a little bit of a guilt feeling, right? Like, gosh, I feel so good that I'm able to help somebody. Should I be feeling this good, and stuff like that? But you've been through a very lot on the health spectrum in a very short period of time. So, what do you want to share about that journey that might be helpful and enlightening to individuals?
Well, and I'm still going through the journey. But,
you are,
yeah. But like you said, it started out with this dry cough. I mean, it was Thanksgiving of 2020, and it went, it continued. I was treated, like you said, for the bronchitis. Nothing helped. We did a second round of antibiotics, and at that time with COVID, it was the telehealth. You couldn't go into the office. So, the doctors did the best they could as far as, here's what we think you have. So we'll diagnose it, we'll treat you for this. So finally, my husband, who is a physician, and he said, it was like in January of 21, he's like, honey, if you're not better, I mean, I would go, have these like coughing jags. And he's like, if you're not better by the end of the month, we're going to, call the doctor back and we're going to push, for this chest x-ray. And I was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. And so that's what we did. I wasn't any better. And it was like that first week in February, I believe it was the 5th, that, we went to the doctor, and she was, again, we've been patients of hers for many years since we moved back to Akron. So, she went along with it. We went next door, did the chest x-ray. And, this is the thing. It was on a Friday. And on, how they put all the results in your patient portal?
Yeah, that little portal thing, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's good news and bad news, too, there as well. So Saturday morning, I'm looking, and I get the email, that, I have a message in my portal. And so I, looked it up and everything. And all I saw, I didn't say, what it said was, basically fluid in the lung. It called it the pleural effusion, and it was the right lung. And, I thought, what the heck is pleural effusion?
Yeah.
And so I didn't.
English, please, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, I knew it didn't sound good. And then I went, my husband was doing some work in his office here at home, and I went in and I'm like, can you come in here? I got the results, and can you translate this for me? What is this? It doesn't sound good, but I'm not sure like how not good this is. So he looked and he said, well, it's basically, the fluid in the lung. So, it was like a few days later. Then on that Tuesday, the doctor, actually my primary doctor, called us. And she's like, okay, at this point, she was going to refer me to a pulmonologist. And, and looking back on this, even this was kind of a blessing, because at the time, again, due to COVID, the pulmonologist, you couldn't get into them.
Right.
I mean, it was, they were just, and that's exactly what happened. I called one doctor ended up leaving a message. They really didn't call back. And again, looking back on it, it was a blessing, because then it would have probably prolonged, me finding out and the diagnosis. Exactly. So, so subsequent, tests and things like that, I'd gone to another doctor because I was also starting to have the pain in my hip and leg. And, so I went to her. And then she's the one that started with, well, you know what, this doesn't sound so good. By this time, I had also had blood work. So the blood work was a little off. Right. We had now the chest x-ray, and then what I was saying about the pain. And she goes, I think we better do an MRI. So hold on, I'm going to have my staff book an MRI for you. I was like, okay. So, it was like that same day, we did the MRI.
Oh, good. At least you got in. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And how soon before they got you the results? Because I know things were crazy during those periods of time. Was it a long delay?
No, it was right away.
Oh, okay.
It was really amazing. Again, looking back on this now, it's almost like God's hand was even, in that. Right. Because I went for the MRI, and then actually she called later, and it was either that night or the next day. But it was pretty much right away. And she's like, okay, here's what it's showing. But what I want you to do is, I think you better go to the emergency room and get yourself admitted. and have some more tests because it's showing, it's showing something there. And, so my husband, actually we came home and I thought, okay, so I'll pack a little bag and we'll go to the emergency, So my husband, though, in the meantime, thought, well, you know what, I better call my primary doctor, Dr. Keith, and just sort of, keep her up to, abreast of what's happening, just as a courtesy. So he did that, and Bill, honestly, she called back within 15 minutes on her cell phone, and she said, oh, no, you're not going to the emergency room. Again, with COVID and everything else, you're not going there. She wanted me to there's another place like a clinic, a subsidiary for the hospital, where she says I'm going to have you set up for 2 more CAT scans. And she said it's less crowded there. It's a mile or 2 from my home. And she said, you go there. I already have you booked for 6 o'clock, and we're for two CAT scans. So we go.
And so they did it all right there. And, quickly. And then how soon after that did they give you the final conclusion?
Oh, my gosh, a couple hours later. This was also incredible.
Right away.
So, we were there until 8:30.
So now all of a sudden, because this is really hard, but all of a sudden you get what is really not good news all the way down the road. And do you remember what your reaction was at that point in time?
I was in shock. I didn't know. I didn't know what to think. I was really, it was almost like being numb, like I was just going through the motions like a little robot. Okay, this is what they want me to do, and I'm going to take my CAT scans, and I'm going to do this.
Right.
And then, so my primary doctor ended up calling us. So I had the scans at 6. We were there till 8:30 at night. At 9 o'clock at night, she calls us back. She calls my husband on his cell phone, and she said, okay, here's what's going on. And she did say at that point, what it showed, that the tumors.
Right.
And she goes, okay, this was on a Thursday. She said, I'll call you in the morning, but I'm going to call an oncologist, friend of mine, colleague, and I'm going to get you in to see him tomorrow, which, was like, if I would have
another miracle. Forget about
exactly. If I would have done that myself, it would have probably been weeks. She got me in immediately. And, it just so happened, though, too, and not just so happened, but so she called us at 7:30 that morning and said, okay, your appointment is at 2 o'clock. And this was February 18th by this point. And that morning, my husband and I, you mentioned that I chair the backpack program, and I've done it for 10 years. I had to go to church to finish putting something, and again, because of COVID, I didn't have my usual crew. It was just John and I. So we had to finish that and then, go do that in the morning and go to my appointment. And then, but when I got to church, at this point, we saw Father Jerry before we went and did this, finish my project, and was telling him everything. And he goes, you know what, Nikki? He goes, even though it's metastasized, or if it's metastasized, there's so much out there. We're just not going to do, don't worry about it right now, kind of thing. And he goes, do you want to go into church? And I said, absolutely. And at this point, I was a little, teary-eyed. I really didn't break down, actually. But I was a little teary and I guess afraid of, the unknown. What's going to happen? What's the doctor going to say? All that.
That's a normal response at that point, yeah.
But, Bill, looking back, when Father Jerry took us into church, and he did like a small parocclasy service with me.
Beautiful.
And I had, it was like I had that. And I have to tell you, I actually felt peace. And so when, this was 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, and my appointment with the oncologist was at 2, and I really was peaceful about it. It was really kind of, sounds strange, I guess, but it was like, well, it is what it is, and let's just go find out and deal with it,
So one of the keys here that comes from your testimony that's been, echoing the testimony from Tracy and Rip is, the importance of using the opportunities of the challenges that you have to find the peace of prayer and to find that opportunity to reconnect in a faithful way. Now, you also have an anointing story too, don't you? I don't want to disrupt the sequence, but I think that's really important to get in there at this point.
Oh no, absolutely. And so Tracy is my best friend, is like a sister to me, because also we got that clue. We lived in Wichita for 15 years. And, that's when Tracy and I became really close, did a lot with the church together. But in fact, Tracy was my very first phone call so the diagnosis and everything was on a Friday. On Saturday morning, and actually before I even made the call, I said to my husband, I'm like, you know what? I can't control this. I mean, I don't know where this is going to lead, but I just have to put all this in God's hands. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we started to make the phone calls. And even before I called some of the other family members, of course, my kids knew, but my very first phone call was to Tracy. And I have to tell you, there were two things. Well, she said many things, but the two things she did say was, okay, she goes, I'm going to email my friend, Father John Kowalczyk in Pennsylvania, and have him send you some, holy oil. So you can you can get anointed. And I'm like, oh, that would be great. And then she says to me, okay, I know what you're going to go through. I know the path you're going to be taking. But she said, Satan is going to want to take you down. Mm-hmm. And you can't let him take, he's going to want to take you to those dark places, and you can't let him do that. And you know what? That has stuck with me.
Right.
It just, I still hear that.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing then like you said, in March I had the 10 treatments, of radiation, and the doctor wanted to do the radiation before I did the chemo. So I was actually supposed to start chemo that first week in April, but the kids and I and my husband, the four of us, we had planned a trip to Taylor, Pennsylvania, like Tracy took her mom. With my kids, work schedules and everything, we were going to go that weekend of, I think it was like the 9th, 10th, 11th, that weekend in April.
And
so we had it all planned, and I called. I thought, you know what? The doctor had told me about the chemo pill that he was going to put me on, but he also, said about all the side effects from the chemo, one of which was, GI issues.
Right. Of course.
And I thought, okay, I have enough problems. I don't need anything else. And I know I have to get to Taylor, Pennsylvania. So I called the oncologist's office, and I talked to the nurse, and I said, can you talk to Dr. Clifford? I'd like to, I have a thing this weekend, and, that I'm going to, I really need to make this pilgrimage. And can you ask him if I could start the chemo on Monday after we get back? But please, tell him the importance that it's not like I want to delay chemo because I'm going on vacation. I feel that I have to do this pilgrimage, and I want to just delay the chemo. So she calls me back in a couple hours, and she said, oh, that's no problem. You can start it on Monday. And I'm like, oh, thank you, Lord. Okay. So we went to
So you
Taylor.
made it there. And when you were there, tell us about that experience real quickly. I know we're running out of time, but I want to make sure we get this in.
Oh my gosh, Bill! Just like Tracy said, and with her mom, it was amazing. I mean, we went there. The aroma, the sense of myrrh. I mean, it was like roses. It smelled like roses. The aroma. And, I was a little afraid, after church, after liturgy. So we're there at liturgy, and I wasn't sure of the procedure, like, do we stay? When do I get anointed? My husband did email the priest there to let him know that, what we were doing, and, we'd like to be anointed, but still we didn't know, well, what should we do after liturgy was over? So when we went up after liturgy and for the Untitled, I said something to one of the deacons, I think,
right.
and said, okay, this is who we are, and we'd like to be anointed. He goes, oh, well, just stay here to the side, And, when everybody else is done, then we'll anoint you. And that's what and it was just amazing to see, up close, you could see the tears, streaming, or where the tears
right from the icon.
Streamed.
And so do you remember what it felt like when you were anointed? Do you remember feeling anything in particular or just even the stillness?
The stillness and the peace. I mean, I just felt a blessing. It wasn't like I felt like, oh, I'm going to be healed, or, what. I just felt this enormous peace that it was almost like, well, everything's going to be okay kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
However it worked out, it was going to be, I felt okay.
Right.
And, so I mean, from the get-go, I told the oncologist, I said, well, I'll do what I have to do, but I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be a patient of yours for a long time.
There you go. Now, and indeed, your prediction has proven to be true, because as I said, any new news? I mean, are things continuing to be well in control under the circumstances?
Things are under control. I go for my CAT scans every 3 months.
Right.
My next one is scheduled for next week, for May 13th.
All right.
And
So
then
you're going to let me know how that comes out.
Oh, absolutely. But you know what, Bill? There's been, like you said, the lesion on the L5 is gone.
Yeah.
The main tumor has shrunk,
What a miracle. It's a miracle.
By 50%. And it's dormant. I mean, it's not growing, and it hasn't shrunk, anymore.
Right.
But, and I feel great. I mean, I really do. I feel normal. I feel healthy. And in fact, I told my husband, and a few other close friends that, if I didn't know any better, I mean, there's times that I feel so good that I forget that I have cancer.
Oh, thank God. Thank God.
Yeah,
now, wait, one thing, did I read accurately that you shot a hole-in-one this past week? Is that true?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we went miniature golfing, Bill, not regular
Hey, listen,
golf.
you don't have to get into all those details, okay? I mean, we're going to give you a hole-in-one on the golf course. That's all good. It's all good.
Actually, the one time we went, I had one hole-in-one, and then the second time we went to a different course, I had 2 holes-in-one.
There you go. There you go. We're gonna start you on a golfing career. All right, Nikki. Before I let you go, I just want. Is there anything that you can share in the form of inspiration to people who are struggling or who may be going through something like this that you would like to share before we let you go with our deep appreciation?
Yes, definitely. From the beginning, besides the phone calls to friends, I went ahead and I emailed our presbytera that we have a prayer chain, within the church. And I emailed Presbytera Helene and said, okay, here's the scoop. Can you share this with the prayer warriors?
That's good.
I need prayer.
And again, just like Rip said, having this army of people praying for you is a wonderful thing. And so those of you who are listening or maybe suffering or maybe experiencing something like this, learn from the lesson of these 3 wonderful people that asking for prayer is a beautiful, wonderful way you can do it. And there'll be all too many people willing to do that. So that's a beautiful thing. What other suggestions would you have to people that they consider doing in a circumstance like this?
Just don't go through it alone. I mean, have your army, whether it's your church family, whether it's, just don't be afraid to share,
right.
and to just let people in and let them help you, whether it's prayer, because I have to tell you, for me, I am on so many different prayer lists from, different churches and what have you, or friends that we've lived at. But Bill, I have felt all along, that strength. I know I have gotten strength from feeling the prayers of all those warriors. And honestly, I really feel that has helped me to get through this every day and to keep getting through this. And so I also, I hear Tracy saying that. I also hear Father Nick Lowe telling me, Nikki, I feel through this, God has a new ministry for you. So if this is the path that God is leading me on, I mean, I never thought in a million years I'd be on a cancer journey, let alone, doing your program or telling my story. But if it can help somebody, then I'm here, you know, and I could be a prayer warrior for somebody else, because prayer works, and God is so good. And I've had little miracles along the way. You know, the cancer has not spread. It didn't go to my brain, but just that would be my main point. You know, have a family of prayer warriors and people that'll help you, you know, with that struggle.
Well, listen, I'm so grateful to God for the fact that you were willing to come on and share your very personal story and the incredible journey that you've been on, and also the hope that comes from having faith and from having a faith-based community and from having a loving family, both within and outside the church, to do it. And so thank you very much. God bless you. And I hope you continue to keep shooting those hole-in-ones.
Hey,
so, and let me know how it goes next week when you have your exam. Okay. We will all be praying for you. And I really want a special thanks to all of my three guests who I think I now am pleased to be able to share with all of you: Rip Kastaris and Tracy Namee and Nikki Bober, some of the most wonderful people, some of the most faithful people who've been through unbelievable things, none of which they would have ever imagined, and remain committed on a faithful journey to understand and to live their stewardship calling. I always want to give a big shout out of thanks to my amazing and courageous Matuska Trudy Richter, who's the show producer of this program in Chesterton, Indiana, and the assistant station manager at Ancient Faith Radio, who makes this all possible. And indeed, and here's an announcement, Matuska Trudy is going to be my next guest on a very special May 29th, 5th Sunday Stewardship Calling program right here on Ancient Faith Radio. And regular listeners know that Matuska Trudy tragically lost her husband, Father Stacy Richter, just a short while ago. And yet in her pain and her great loss, she's stayed focused on not only her loving children and her family and her church community, but her calling and her service. And in the fullness of time, she returned to producing these Stewardship Calling and other Ancient Faith Radio programs. And as we worked together, I asked her how she was proceeding forward in life after the unbelievably way too early and tragic loss of her husband and the father of her children. And as I listened to her, a strength and resilience that was rooted in kind of a true Orthodox Christian understanding of life and death became more and more clear. So, you know, being the shy guy I am, I asked her if she would be willing to share that perspective with others. So on the 5th Sunday in May, March 29th, right here at 8 p.m. Eastern, we're going to broadcast what will be a pre-recorded interview with Matuska Trudy, because she's going to provide us the story of her journey and tools and some of the loving support to face death of our loved ones. But after we had agreed to do this, and I twisted her arm, the Holy Spirit was not done with this program. And as regular listeners to Stewardship Calling know, last year at the end of May, we released an incredible 3-part interview series with Father George Livanos and his Presbytero Dianthi. And Father George had received the bad news from his doctor that he had a terminal diagnosis, and rather than turning internally, he and Presbytero used that chapter of their lives to continue his ministry, but on another pulpit, if you will, and provide us all a public roadmap on how to live and how to die with faith and dignity and grace and purpose. And as it turns out, after speaking with Presbytero Dianthi and listening to her incredible motivational way that she's found to live her life after Father George's untimely passing not long after we aired the interview, it became clear to me that the Holy Spirit wanted Presbytero Dianthi's voice to join Matuska Trudy's voice and to allow us for them to share the inspirational wisdom on how to move forward in living our lives and calling after the tragedy of the death of our loved ones. So I hope you'll tune in on the May 29th Stewardship Calling pre-recorded program here on Ancient Faith Radio. And then again, we're going to come back right on June 1st, where I'm going to have the privilege of interviewing my dear friend, Dr. George Koulianos, and principal researcher, Dr. George Stavros, and Presbytera Nicole Kyrgios, who's the president of the National Sisterhood of Presbyteras. And in that program, we're actually going to explore the amazing and new empirical research that's been concluded on specific issues that are being dealt with by the wives of clergy. So how incredible the timing is on all of this. Of course, all of you are invited to check out the always free content on stewardshipcalling.com that covers a whole gambit of services. And if you find these Stewardship Calling First Wednesday and Fifth Sunday programs to be helpful or informative, please tell your friends and tune in live, or you can listen to the archive podcast version. So this program and all the others can be found either by going to my website, stewardshipcalling.com, and go to the Internet Radio tab in Ancient Faith Radio, and then just scroll down to the date of the program. Today's date is May 4th, 2022. Or you can go to the Ancient Faith Radio live program pages and go to the Stewardship Calling podcast archive pages, and again, scroll down to today's date. If you have any questions or you want to follow up on anything or you need anything I can do for you, please email me at bill@stewardshipcalling.com. And I hope and pray, as I always do at the end of every program, that you remember that two of the most important days of your life are, first, the day you were born, and second, the day you figure out why. And if you're not already living your stewardship calling, I hope the inspiration of Rip and Tracy and Nikki and Matuska Trudy and President Anthony will inspire you to prayerfully discern your why and your stewardship calling and start the most extraordinary second part of your life. Thanks for listening. God bless you. And as always, I pray that you SOTPAETJ, which stands for stay on the path, capital T, capital P, and enjoy the journey. God bless and good night.